The saloon was bursting with noise and heat, thick with whiskey breath and the low hum of a restless crowd. Cowboys leaned over splintered tables, their boots thudding against the wooden floor, spurs jingling like restless bells. The piano in the corner had gone silent to the tune cut off mid-song when the sheriff's booming voice sliced through the room. "Boys, how about a little entertainment?" He grinned, his voice greasy with arrogance. "Hit all these bottles, and the prize is yours." A chorus of hoots and jeers filled the room as he gestured toward the open yard beyond the saloon doors. Outside, under the harsh glare of the desert sun, a row of empty bottles shimmered on the fence rail, lined up like glass soldiers waiting to die. The light caught them just right, throwing sharp glints that made men squint and curse. But none of that drew more attention than what, or rather, most stood beside the sheriff. She was young, no more than 20, her skin bronzed by the desert and her dark hair falling like a shadow down her back. Her wrists were bound loosely in front of her, as though the sheriff wanted to make a show of power without actually fearing her strength. But her eyes, those fierce, defiant eyes, held the kind of fire that could make a man forget his place. The sheriff yanked her forward by the arm and sneered, "An Apache girl, wild as they come. Whoever's got the guts and the aim wins her." The words fell like a spark into dry brush. Some men laughed. Others shifted uncomfortably. There was no law in this part of Arizona worth speaking of, and morality had long been left behind in the dust. Still, a few faces turned away. Even among outlaws and drifters, the sight of a bound woman being offered as a prize didn't sit right. From the back of the saloon, a man rose slowly. He was tall, with the lean build of someone who'd spent more years in the saddle than under a roof. His duster coat hung heavy with dust, and a long rifle rested in his calloused hands. His hat shadowed his face, but when he stepped into the sunlight, his eyes were steady, cold as steel, but alive with something that didn't fit the place. The sheriff's grin widened. "Well, look who decided to wake up. You in, cowboy?" The man didn't answer right away. He glanced at the bottles, then at the girl. The wind tugged at a loose strand of her hair, and she stared back at him unflinching. Proud. There was no plea for rescue in her expression, only challenge. It was as if she were daring him to try, to prove himself, or perhaps to understand that this was more than a game. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, calm. "What happens if I win?" "You get the girl," the sheriff replied, spitting tobacco into the dust. "She's yours to keep. Do what you like." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The cowboy's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. He turned his eyes toward the bottles again, counting 10 in all, each one spaced unevenly, shimmering in the heat. He walked slowly to the starting mark, adjusting the rifle against his shoulder. The chatter died down. "You got 3 chances," the sheriff said with mock fairness. "Miss one, and she stays right where she is." The cowboy nodded once. His fingers brushed the trigger, feeling the weight of the gun. The air went still, the kind of stillness that comes right before lightning hits. Somewhere, a horse stamped its hoof. Uneasy, he drew a slow breath, squinted against the sunlight, and fired. The crack of the rifle split the air. The first bottle shattered instantly, a burst of light and glass. The crowd erupted in cheers. Without lowering his weapon, he adjusted his aim, fired again. Another explosion of glass, then another. One by one, the bottles fell, each shot a whisper of precision and quiet fury. The Apache girl didn't move, but her expression changed slightly. Her lips parted, not in fear but in something closer to disbelief. Perhaps she'd seen plenty of men try to win her before, via drunk fools with shaky hands and cruel laughter, but this one was different. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't showing off. His movements were clean, deliberate. Each bullet seemed to strike not just glass, but the very arrogance of the men watching. When the 7th bottle broke, the cowboy paused. He wiped sweat from his brow and took another breath. The sheriff crossed his arms, smirking. "Still got a few to go, cowboy. Don't choke now." The man didn't look at him. His eyes met the girl's again, and for a moment, the noise of the crowd faded. Only the sound of the wind and the low creak of the fence remained. It was then that he realized it wasn't the bottles he was aiming at anymore. It was the injustice of what stood before him. He lifted the rifle again, the metal glinting in the sun, and squeezed the trigger. The 8th bottle exploded in a burst of sunlight and sound. The crowd howled, boots stopping, whiskey sloshing. The cowboy's face stayed calm, his eyes fixed on the last two bottles shimmering at the far end of the fence. Each one stood like a challenge, yet fragile, distant, and waiting to be judged. He reloaded slowly, the metallic click echoing across the tense yard. The Apache girl's gaze hadn't wavered. If she feared for her fate, she didn't show it. Instead, she looked at him as if trying to see past his hat brim, to the man beneath the duster in silence. He raised the rifle again. The world narrowed until there was nothing but him, the bottle, and the heat pressing down like a hand on his neck. He fired. The bullet struck true, another bottle shattered into glittering shards. The crowd erupted again, wild and breathless. Only one bottle remained. The sheriff's grin faltered slightly. This cowboy wasn't supposed to make it this far. "Careful, friend," the sheriff called out, trying to sound amused. "One left. That last one's a devil." The cowboy said nothing. He exhaled, steady and slow. His finger brushed the trigger, but for the first time, doubt flickered across his eyes. He could feel the sweat on his palms, the dry taste of dust in his mouth. The girl was watching him in no fear, no pity, just waiting. Then the shot rang out. The sound echoed over the empty desert, startling a few crows from a nearby tree. But this time, the bottle didn't fall. It wobbled, trembled on the fence rail, and somehow remained standing. A hush swept through the crowd, followed by laughter, sharp, main laughter that rolled like thunder. "Well now," the sheriff barked, clapping his hands, "guess you ain't as sharp as you thought." He turned toward the girl, gripping her arm roughly. "Looks like you're staying right where you are." The cowboy lowered his rifle. His expression didn't change, but something deep in his eyes darkened. He looked at the last bottle again, the one that had escaped him. It wasn't just glass, it was a symbol now, of power, of freedom denied. "Hold on," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but it carried like a warning. "You said I had 3 chances." The sheriff's smirk faltered. "You used AM." "No," the cowboy said, stepping closer. "That was 2. The crowd murmured. The sheriff hesitated, then shrugged. "Fine," he said, tossing his hand dismissively. "One more, but make it count." The cowboy nodded once, then turned to the girl. Their eyes met again, an unspoken understanding passing between them. He wasn't just shooting for her freedom anymore, he was shooting for his own conscience, for something lost in a world that had forgotten right from wrong. He adjusted his stance, the rifle heavy in his hands. The wind had picked up, kicking dust across the yard. For a moment, everything blurred, the heat, the light, the murmuring crowd. Then, silence. He fired. The sound tore through the air like a strike of lightning. The last bottle shattered cleanly, a perfect shot. Glass rained down like a brief storm, sparkling before it vanished into the sand. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the silence broke. Cheers, curses, disbelief. The sheriff's jaw tightened, his grin now a forced twitch. "Well," he muttered, "a deal's a deal." The cowboy didn't move toward the girl. He simply lowered his weapon, eyes fixed on the sheriff. "Untie her," he said, calm but sharp as a blade. The sheriff laughed nervously. "Now hold it, now don't go getting righteous on me. She's property of the town. You won her fair and square. Take her." The cowboy's stare hardened. "I don't own people." That silenced the laughter. Even the drunks in the back looked up. The wind carried his words like a sermon over dry land. Slowly, he stepped forward until he stood between the sheriff and the girl. The sheriff's hand hovered near his revolver, but something in the cowboy's eyes made him hesitate. Without breaking his gaze, the cowboy reached out and cut the rope binding her wrists. The fibers snapped softly, and the Apache girl's hands fell free. She rubbed her wrists, staring at him not with gratitude, but with wary disbelief. The sheriff's voice trembled with anger. "You're making a mistake, stranger." "Maybe," the cowboy said, "but it's mine to make." He turned, gesturing for her to walk. She hesitated for a breath, then stepped forward, her posture tall and proud. Together, they moved through the stunned crowd, the dust swirling around their boots. No one dared stop them. The sheriff's voice rose behind them, but neither turned back. As they disappeared into the desert glare, the last of the broken glass sparkled in the remnants of a game that had ended differently than anyone expected.